All right, we are back on the podcast where we are training men in spiritual fitness. I am Evan McGinty here with my friend Joe Barnard. Joe, how are things in Scotland right now?
Yeah, it's I feel like I always talk about the weather, which is a pretty Scottish thing. So I'm not going to do that. Things are great in Scotland. So we're into January and yeah, beginning to have a little bit more sunlight. I talk about sunlight. That's not weather, but it's not as dark as it was. So enjoying just a few more minutes of day each day.
It's okay. You can talk about the weather. We all like
I
talking
can't
about the
escape
weather.
it.
Yeah, you can't escape it. It's all right. It's raining here in Louisiana right now. I got a text from my mom yesterday of snowing in Texas, but it's rain here in Louisiana, so we miss out. We don't get any of the fun, but that's all right. Thankful to be here with you again, talking about what does it mean to be a man? We are still on this journey together. We've been doing this for a few episodes now, where we're trying to bring some clarity, much needed clarity to this question of what does it mean to be a man? What is biblical masculinity? These are things that are, bantered about a lot online these days, and even in our own heads. Am I a man? Am I? We ask these things of ourselves, and so we're trying to bring clarity to that through reading some books together. And I'm trying to see what are other people saying about this journey to manhood and masculinity. What are the goods that we can take away from these books, and what are some of the things that maybe don't fit within the Bible or don't fit within even a modern setting? We've taken, I guess, the past couple of weeks just kind of looking back. The first question or the first book we read together tried to answer that question. What is God's mandate in Genesis 2, particularly for men? And it was a real good book. The Masculine Mandate is what it was called, just trying to aim us towards a masculinity of tending and keeping and reflecting God's image and those sorts of things. And then we talked about, where does manhood begin? Last week we looked at that book, Future Men, and how manhood is where boyhood is headed. And so that was some great insights there. But the book we've got this week is called Leaving Boyhood Behind. And I really enjoyed this. I'd never heard of this book. I don't know where you got this book, but you recommended it to me. It was a really good read. And to me, this was a book that kind of helped me answer this question. What does it mean not to be a man, but to become a man? Is there some sort of pathway that we can begin to get on or get our boys on towards manhood? And so I guess, yeah, let me just open up broadly to you, Joe, and let you talk a little bit about the book. How did you hear about this book? What do you kind of see as the big picture? What's the big insight, the big takeaway for this book?
A friend of mine who's a Roman Catholic and runs a ministry that helps teenagers think about issues of gender and sexuality recommended it. And I will say, I think it's one of the most helpful books on this topic I've
Mhm.
come across. It's written by a Roman Catholic, so if that's not your background, I imagine a lot of our listeners aren't from that tradition. There'll be elements that are distinctively Roman Catholic. At the same time, I think his insight in terms of what you might call the journey of manhood.
Yeah.
Because as we think about this, it's not just sometimes we think, well, it's biology, or we just think it's kind of a spiritual imprint. But there's an aspect where developing from boy to man takes time and
Mm.
takes a progression, and there's should be milestones and events that mark that path. And I think he does a wonderful job thinking about the path as well as the kind of relationships in the relationships that change
Mhm.
in that journey.
Yeah.
So similar insights in some ways to other books, but has a really wonderful perspective.
Yeah, so one of the things he does really well in this book, let me mention the author, I guess, Jason Craig, the author. But one of the things he does really well is talk about the rites of passage for boys becoming men, and a part of leaving boyhood behind is embarking on and being invited into these rites of passage. So what are the rites of passage, and what are the right ones that boys need to be called for into in order to become men?
Yeah, what's interesting is what's absent from the modern world.
Hmm.
What's interesting is the way that things that have been universal culturally, so you can go different times, different continents, and find that we've always marked progressions of kind of development, both for male and for females. And that there have been these rites of passage, these kind of symbolic rituals that have helped us answer the question, where am I and who am I? Now, there's ways that these exist for us. There's ways in which they've disappeared. I think Scotland, in particular,
Mhm.
um, is really suffering from a lack of these kind of generational markers.
Mhm.
But part of what he does is take what really is more than just a cultural formula. It's something that again you see cross culturally. This need, in a sense, for separation to occur. This
Yes.
need, in some way, to mark a kind of integration into a new community, and then a kind of kind of a return at the end of it.
Mhm.
And that as boys becoming men, we need that sort of shape in our life. We need to be at certain moments separating from something before. We need to be being
Mhm.
integrated into a new kind of community, and eventually we have to then be moving towards something such as fatherhood and such as marriage. Where we then begin the process of doing this again.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how he talks about we don't have like an information problem right now when it comes to bringing, leaving boyhood behind and bringing boys into it's not that we need better programming or better information delivery. It is kind of a cultural problem, as you're speaking to, that we haven't set up these rites of passage in a healthy way that are, yes, when you become a man, you have to leave boyhood behind, that there is coming out of immaturity to get into maturity and that separation there and then that initiation phase into kind of a communal tribe experience of becoming a man. One of the things I thought was really fascinating and that took me by surprise was him talking about Jesus's own rites of passage, which I'll be honest, I didn't see it. I've read the Bible. I didn't see it. Could you speak even a little bit on that? And do you remember that portion in the book?
Yeah, and I think it's really insightful. I think a lot of us, those that know the Gospels, are surprised because one, we're not told much about Jesus's childhood, other than the birth
Yeah.
narratives we tell at Christmas. Immediately, we're at like his baptism and the beginning of his public ministry. But there's that one story
Mhm.
that happens when his parents, leave Jerusalem. He's still at the temple, and there's several days, and they come back and they find him, and he's about his father's business.
Mhm.
But what's so interesting that Jason Craig picks up on is the age of Jesus. He's 12 years old. That's the age of boys going through puberty. That's the age where all of these kind of cultural rites tend to be happening. And for Jesus, it's a really, you can see it. There is a way, there's a separation, first of all, that's occurring. Often, and as we just think of boys in general, it's a separation in many ways from a mom and from women moving towards spending more time with men.
Mhm.
Jesus is a little bit different in the sense that now he's separating from both of his parents and really stepping into a fuller relationship with his heavenly father.
Yeah.
But you really do see this separation, him stepping into a deeper sense of his own identity and mission,
Mhm.
and that then governing, him as he moves forward in his life. And so I think it's fascinating that it does indicate that this is important, that even
Yes.
Jesus underwent a kind of rite of passage, a unique one, but nonetheless emphasizing that we need rites of passage to help us again answer those questions.
Yeah.
Who am I? And where am I in my life? And this is, as I look at boys, I think so often they look lost.
Yeah.
It's like I got a couple of teenage boys in my head right now, just from here in Edinburgh, and in those teenage years, and you can just tell, am I a man? Am I not a man? How do I know if I am a man? What indicates? Is it that
Yeah.
I just start to drink, and stay out later on a Friday night? And you can just see there's nothing to help them say, hey, look, this is what you're preparing for. This is why you feel different than you did. And here's a group, here's a fraternity of men that you can begin to be more immersed within.
Mm, mm. Yeah, so one of the strengths of this book is just emphasizing over and over again that you've got to be called out of childhood and
Yeah.
all out of boyhood and be called into manhood. But what does it mean for boys to put behind their childish ways? What does it mean to begin to put childhood behind you?
Yeah. You have to begin to start to have an understanding of what it means to be a man. And I think, being a man is undertaking responsibility.
Yeah.
It's saying that your life is not about yourself. It's governed ultimately toward becoming a husband and a father, where you're responsible for a household and a family. And if you think about being a boy, in many ways, it's the opposite of all of that.
Yeah.
Boys have lots of energy, but often it's just about their own thrill, their own experience. They're not known to be particularly responsible with things that are put into their care. And without killing that energy,
Yeah.
without killing that passion and zeal,
Hmm.
it has to begin to be directed toward what is productive and what is good and what is holy and what is godly.
Hmm.
And so, that's part of, growing out of this stage where you're simply under the discipline of your parents to stepping into a phase where you're beginning to be self-disciplined toward a calling. That's what it doesn't happen all at once, but you need this marker to tell you, look, I'm not just a boy.
Yeah.
I'm not just, in a sense, biding my time at home. I'm stepping up. Now I'm entering into this phase of being a young man because one day I'm going to be a father. One day I'm going to be a husband. One day I'm going to have these responsibilities. And I need to begin to be more prepared for that.
Yeah, and I do like how Jason made me think about both how entering manhood is something that men must invite boys to do, but also that boys must choose to put childhood behind them and enter manhood. That there is kind of both these parties. It was interesting. I was having coffee with one of my sons earlier this week, and I asked him. I said, do you feel like you're closer to being a boy or closer to being a man? And he quickly answered, he said, a boy, Dad. I'm closer to being a boy. And I said, okay, well, why? He's like, because I like to play. I still like to play. And I thought it was such a good answer. And he was honest. He's like, Dad, I still like to play. And men, I think they do stuff, you know? So that was his best explanation. Men they do stuff, and what he was saying is he recognizes that to be a man is to take on responsibility, and there is a putting away of childhood things, and that he's still in a phase right now where he's not ready to step out of play and into responsibility of things. And I think the danger for us is that we can have this period of adolescence where that boy remains, hey, I like to play and stays there forever and never chooses to step into responsibility. But also, me as father can see the fun that he's having and play and never invite him and say, no, no, now it's time. It's time to put away the childhood ways. So, but I really like how he interacted with the two and kind of says, hey, we've got this is a call both for men and for families and for communities to invite boys into manhood, but also for boys to make the decision. Hey, it's time for me to grow up and put away the childish ways, take on responsibility. Don't lose that energy, like you said,
Yeah.
but take on a responsibility. Let's talk a little bit about just kind of the tribal aspect of this, for lack of better terms. What does it look like to include more people in this pathway to becoming a man? How can a group of men or family take part in the initiation of a man?
Yeah, I think back to my own experience, which was imperfect, but nonetheless much that I'm really appreciative for.
Yeah.
So I grew up divorced household. I think my mom, though, recognized, and this is something James Craig talks about, but that there's a real danger about a boy being under his mom too long. In the way that
Yes.
that can, the kind of cultural type of a mama's boy, that can become an unhealthy kind of relationship. And so not having a precise formula, one of the things she did do was at various moments, I was blessed with lots of aunts and uncles, and
Hmm.
having these moments where gathering those uncles and creating a moment that felt serious, and a moment that even included them, praying over,
Yeah.
in a sense, putting their hands on, speaking directly to me.
Good.
And I think those, while they didn't happen necessarily at like a particular age, and they didn't pick
Yeah.
up a tradition that had been passed on culturally, nonetheless, there was a kind of gravity of all of that. Like I felt like, okay, I'm graduating to something a bit more and a bit different.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that had to involve a group of people, which it did in those moments. It
Yeah.
had to involve people that had respect, that I respected,
Yeah.
and that knew me. Um, and so I think that's what, we're not just describing kind of a nuclear family where there's a dad and a child and a mom, and this is just at your table. It doesn't have to be your relatives. It could be through a church or whatever, but you have these moments where you can pull these younger boys, these young men aside, and in some way, groups of men letting those guys know, hey, look, we want you to begin to join us.
Yeah.
And we're inviting, we're also celebrating, we're creating a moment so you can see this is marked. We've just
Yeah.
passed a milestone. You're a little bit further down the road. And I think that's what's so important is that there's that journey and they feel the progression.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is something our culture misses these days is that masculinity is communal. You cannot grow in masculinity in isolation. It's not something to be meant in isolation. You cannot grow in masculinity on your own. Masculinity is a communal thing, and that this is something that we grow in boys as we invite them in together. Yeah, having uncles that pray over you, having family members that are this is a communal thing to call boys into masculinity. You're not gonna be able to do it just sitting at home alone, guys. Like this is a piece that even for those guys that are in their 20s sitting there asking, am I a man? How do I become a man? It's not by staying at home and not exposing yourself to groups of men. You're going to at some point have to choose to surround yourself by men and have that idea of rubbing off on one another. And this is a growing nature of things. But you mentioned moms. And what is a mom's role in bringing a boy into manhood? Look, I'll be honest, I think that was the strength of this book. I loved, he had a couple of chapters in particular that talked about the mom's role in bringing a boy into manhood. What did you think of those chapters and how would you describe that to guys?
Yeah. I'd want to take a step back and say that there is a certain progression or there's a certain journey that the Bible itself outlines.
Hmm.
And what's interesting, we find it all the way in Genesis 2, that the way, that initial teaching that we receive about marriage and what it is, that a man leaves his home, he separates, he joins a wife, they become one flesh. In a sense, that becomes a household. And it's really important that guys see that that's what the real journey encompasses. It is
Yeah.
aimed toward family. It is aimed toward establishing a home, which in part means leaving a home.
Mm,
And I think there's that separation from it. And I say all of it because that's where, and again, the mom's son's relationship comes in. That that there is an age at which the relationship between a son and a mom needs to change significantly.
yeah.
There's a kind of death, not a complete death,
Mhm.
but this is something that I think moms have to realize is difficult because if you're the one that literally bore the child in your womb,
Yeah.
raised it, had that intimate, close relationship, then there's this season, and it usually is around that age, 12 or so, but where all of a sudden the boy now needs to spend less time with
Hmm.
his mom, needs to be spending more time among men, and
Hmm.
that's going to change the relationship. Now, it shouldn't change the respect. And I think one thing James Craig does really well is talk about how sons should treat women and should treat their mother, and that role should be one of great honor.
Hmm.
But the relationship, if the separation doesn't happen, that's when you have that unhealthy kind of dependency that becomes the kind of stereotype of a mama's boy. And we all know that that's a kind of failure to emerge as a man.
Yeah, I love how he says, I'll get the quote wrong, but something like, a boy is a gift that a mother, gives to the world. But a boy is both like this wonderful um, gift that a mother gets, from God, but also a gift that she has to give to the world at some point.
Yeah.
Like it's her highest value in some ways. Like she loves her boy, but at some point she's got to give that gift to the world and turn him over and recognize and affirm him in being a man now. Like, yeah, you're no longer mama's boy. You're
Yeah.
now a man. And that's tough for moms. I see how difficult this is for moms. Even my own. I don't know if your mom has nicknames for you, Joe. I won't make you confess them, but I will say
Thank
one
you.
of mine that my mom calls me her man boy. And I've never put any thought into that, but you're my man boy. But I think there is something in her she's done well at affirming me as being a man, but she will always want me to be her boy. She loved me as a boy, and she will tell you so many stories about me as a boy because there's nothing like the pride of a
Yeah.
boy for a mother. And even to this day, when I go out on these hiking trips where I'll disappear for a week at a time, my mom gets sick to her stomach, You know, she still is
Yeah.
just can't stand the thought of me being introduced into danger. Doesn't like it. Is sick to her stomach. But at the same time, she's done a good job. She will, in the months before that, she was like, "What can I buy? How can I help you go out on this journey? What do you need?"
Right.
And so there is that balance to being a mom. You can't get rid of that pride and that boy that you love, but you've got to at some point affirm you are now man and push him out of the nest in some way. Your relationship does have to change. And yeah, I thought he did a beautiful job of talking about that. What other roles within, I mean, we talked a little bit about dads, but do you see even just the role of a father within a family playing a particular role in this? And what does this look like in different types of families?
Yeah, I think the scary thing, any of this will should awaken in us dads just the fear of the awesome responsibility that if fatherhood is aimed toward, or if boyhood is aimed toward fatherly love, if the essence of
Yeah,
masculinity is fatherly love, then that is something that's going to be reflected more than learned by any kind of teaching.
yeah,
They are watching all the time. If and we know we get it wrong, but each step of the way we can crush that
mm,
developing strength, um, or we can find ways to affirm and cultivate it. And there's no formula. This is one of the things that should keep us on our knees, is just how important it is to take these young boys and introduce them, raise them up so that they can be loving, gracious men and use their strength for good in this world. And
yeah,
yeah, we have to be walking closely with God to have the wisdom
yes.
and all that we need to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think as fathers, we have to be careful of not being in the home but too busy with other
Yeah.
things to, really raise our boys. Because again, moms are really good like at doing their job, and a mom is gonna mom. Like that's what mom's gonna do. So a mom will, if a man doesn't step in, a mom will raise her boy and just
Yeah.
keep him a boy though. She cannot bring him past boyhood. In order for him to get past boyhood, he needs a man. And if the man is in the home but not really present, and if we as fathers are not really making a clear call, a clear initiation into manhood, a clear inviting into a communal experience, then we've failed as fathers. And mom will continue to raise that boy to be a boy and the comfort and the care and the security that a mom brings. And so it is integral to have both of those and working in tandem. I even John Tyson has a book out on the intentional father, I think is what it's called, and so he talks a little bit about this as well, the rites of passage, bringing a boy to a man. And he kind of has a formula for it, like, hey, do these
Right.
things at this age, kind of thing. But one of his first steps is the mom takes her son out on a dinner to affirm what you're about to embark on with your father is approved, not only approved by me, but like this is what I want for you. And so it is
Right.
that's both the separation from the mom, but also the inviting in of a dad and how they work together to do that, and that how this is a kind of a household inviting thing. And then yeah, bringing along with a tribe, a group of men is important as well. Um, yeah, what else would you kind of add to this conversation on leaving boyhood behind?
Yeah, I think just in terms of seeing where the journey goes awry,
Yeah,
that in a sense, and I think what's so important is realize it's not that our culture doesn't have a set path. It's just not the right path.
yeah,
And so, there's he does a good job marking like where we deviate. One of them is a failure to launch.
mhm,
It's to stay kind of in that safe place and be coddled, and we know that's not good. Kind of a second place you go awry is when, there's that intermediate phase where, you're becoming a man, you have this energy, life's full of challenge, and you kind of want to stay there, that kind of thrill seeking, the sort of the person who wants to be 18 forever and,
yeah,
should be moving out of that toward a place where he's looking to establish a home, but just wants to be not a boy, but wants to be like an adolescent. And again, that's an aborted manhood.
yeah,
But then the last thing, though, if you're oriented in your calling, your masculine calling toward fatherly love, if you end up living for work and career, that's not the God appointed. And now we are called to
mhm,
work. We see that in Genesis. But there's any number of dads that they provide a check to help pay the bills, but they're
yeah,
not home and present and raising boys. And our world hadn't set us up. In the old days, we would probably have a trade, and our boys would probably be joining us in that calling, and we'd be spending
Yeah.
all of that time with them every day. That's not our life,
Uh-huh.
which means modern men are going to have to work hard, make choices, and maybe cut back from work and realize that more important than the vacation is that time that they're getting with their
Yeah.
son and taking him along this path and leading him into a place where he can be a responsible man one day.
Yeah, no, that's good. Uh, but before we kind of close things out, I don't know if we really hammered on the thesis of the book or what I see as kind of the main main idea. We've talked in and around it, but I'd love to kind of get your response to it. I think what he's really pulling at, what's unique about this book is he's saying, masculinity is a gift that is received and responded to. Now, when I first read that at the very beginning of the book, I'll be honest, I had no idea what he meant. It's kind of above me. Masculinity is something that is received and responded to. Now, as I read the full book, I got a clearer picture. But can you kind of summarize that for guys? What does that mean and why is it important?
Yeah, I would start with the distortion. So one would be think masculinity is a non-entity. So our culture says it's nothing. It's a lie. It's a myth. It's dangerous. Eradicate it.
Uh-huh.
That's not right. The other counterfeit version would be to say that masculinity is a right, that like it's mine. I have this strength to do what I want with it. And that's called toxic masculinity. And those are all the guys that went out and conquered the world and, had sexual conquests and just, lived to build and make money. The third says it's a gift. It's an awesome gift. It's a dangerous gift. And if you're given a huge gift and you appreciate its worth, then the recoil of that is not pride, it's humility and responsibility.
Mhm.
What do I do with this great gift? And whoa, it's so much more valuable than I realized. And that's what guys need to be awakening to as they move from boys to young men to men is masculinity is real. It's
Yeah.
scary how
Yeah.
significant it is. So, what do I do with this gift so that instead of it being used for harm in the world, it can be harnessed and actually results in great blessing and good? And that's, when that happens, when we see the kind of fatherly love of God the Father, the kind of shepherding of Jesus worked out in our families and in our communities, then masculinity is no longer a source of evil, it's a source of incredible good to be released in the world.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I think that that's a good ending point there because that's where we want to leave guys. We are on this quest of trying to identify what is masculinity, what is healthy biblical masculinity, what does it mean to be a man? And I love how you identified some man, there are some messed up versions of masculinity out there, and that's not where we're headed. And we do want to call men into manhood. I do, man, this book, Leaving Boyhood Behind. Again, it's not bad to be a boy. He says that it's not bad to be a boy. Being a boy is, that is part of life, but it's bad to remain a boy. And we do at some point have to grow up, and we have to at some point even invite other boys to out of boyhood and into manhood. To be a boy is to be cared for and comforted by someone else. To be a man is to begin to do that care and comforting for someone else. And that's what we want to see more of in our communities is men that are taking on that call. So, yeah, I just invite guys to continue to join us in on this journey as we are slowly uncovering and clarifying, hopefully, what does it mean to be a man? And so we'll do this again next week on the podcast with another book. So y'all join us then.